It sounds good. Leanne, you want to go ahead and get us cranking here?
Sure thing. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our NOAA Tiny Talks workshop. Today, as you know, is Development Day with Scott Banta and Robin. But before I turn it over, just want to make sure it's cool with you guys. You're being recorded so we can upload these into our member portal. And so with that, also, if there's questions, you can raise your hand to ask them or throw them in the chat and I'll be happy to ask the question for you. Robin, you want to take over? Thanks, everybody, and Happy New Year.
Sure, absolutely. Glad that everybody's back from the holidays, ready to for a fantastic 2023. I think I'm going to have to agree with Scott that this really looks like a banner year for a lot of people. And one of my favorite mentors, Jim Rohn, was talking to a group of people, and they wanted to know what the next year was going to hold. And he said, "Well, I do know what's going to happen this next year." And everybody kind of leaned forward and, "Okay, come on, what is it? What is it?" And he says, "Well, next year is going to have opportunity mixed with difficulty." And so that's what we're going to have next year: opportunity mixed with difficulty. And so everyone that's out there, if there are going to be some difficulties, but along with those difficulties, there's going to be opportunity for those that know where to look for them. So I'm encouraging everybody to do that and do some fantastic things in 2023. So today we're talking with Scott, and Scott's going to be sharing with us what's called a pro forma, but basically it's the numbers of the project. How are they going to add up? What are the costs going to be? What are the profit? Probably show us some profit and that kind of thing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and turn it over to Scott. If you want to introduce yourself again, say hi to Scott, everybody, and we'll get this party started.
Happy New Year. Just for update, I'm a permitting expert, if you will, acquiring land and getting it permitted for real estate development. I've done about 85 projects in the greater Orlando area. I usually stick on about a 2-hour rubber band to Orlando, so I'm not real familiar with stuff that happens outside of Florida, but we have a pretty good handle on what happens in probably about 20 counties in Florida and different cities and burgs, et cetera. We're really excited for 2023 and hope you all are too. And we wish you a happy new year. We've already had a couple of planning meetings for our deal, and we're getting ready to crank on our first project, which will be around 22 units. And then I've told everybody I'm going to have the second piece of land under contract and ready to go at the end of February. And then by the end of April, we're going to have our third one going. We're going to be doing them, as we talked about a few months ago, a little larger projects. We're probably going to concentrate on 30 to 60 units will be our kind of feature project. And we're also selling our homes. They're built on foundations, and we're hitting the part of the market that's 80 to 120% of median income from the affordability standpoint. So we're not niching down to, really low income. Where the counties we're dealing in, one of them, the median income is about 55,000. So the 80 to 120% is roughly 45 to call it 70,000. And then another county we're looking at is Seminole County, and that median income's over 70,000. So we're looking at 60 to 90,000 worth of income as a theoretical can afford our product. So what I'm going to run you through today is a pro forma. Actually, we'll see if we can have time to do two. We did a pro forma on our 22 unit project that we're selling the units. And then I did one as a renting the unit. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. And can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, can you see my cursor moving around on it?
You just got smaller. The screen just got there. I see your cursor. Yes.
Okay. All right, so basically, this is a format that I use for almost all the projects that we do. And it's reproducible, and it's a fairly simple format. So if you look down here, we have different worksheets. There's a summary sheet, a recap sheet, one for the permitting, one for the construction, and then we have a big deal here with impact fees and utility costs. So I'm going to start with permitting. So we're planning on starting our permitting and our rezoning changes in April. This process is going to take us through to the end of the year, including the permitting of this, and then we would anticipate closing our land when we have all our permits in hand, and that would be in December. So I'm going to run you through, and I like this format because I'm a visual guy. So here I put X's in the months that things are happening, if that makes any sense. And then so here we can see that the rezoning and the future land use change and all that, and the permitting and the pre-development work is all happening at basically the same time. We would anticipate actually having, I could take these X's out, and we should be fully rezoned either in August or September, and then a few more months to get the rest of the permits. So the way this then flows is, here are the categories that we have. We have survey and plat. The plat would be towards the end. The civil engineering. We usually have to employ the services of a landscape architect. We would typically have our civil engineer do the base plan, but then when we actually want to put the material in and the actual materials that we're going to use, the xeriscaping and the permaculture, we would have a landscape architect help us with that. The architect is in a different spot of the pro forma, because we would anticipate using those plans over and over again. So we don't have it in this particular project. This is project related information now. We have what's called a level 1 environmental, which is also known as a phase 1. That's where your environmental consultants is going to look at historical aerials, which you can do too, and see what the uses of the property are. Most of our counties around here have historical aerials back to the 40s. So if your property hasn't been used for anything since the 40s, you can pretty much see what it is. Sometimes they've been cleared, they became orange groves, then they got maybe frozen out. Orange groves became oak trees, was succeeded by oak trees, or you can see if someone is using the property as a fish camp or a camp or an RV park or a mobile home park or whatever it was by looking at historical aerials. Those are usually available free through your county. Then he'll also, or the environmental consultant will also go on site, and they look for things like 55-gallon drums full of nasty chemicals and whether or not people have been dumping things on site. We have a lot of orange grove properties here where the farmers used to have a small pavilion that they would pull their tractors into, and then they changed the oil. When they changed the oil, they just pull the plug out, and all that oil would go right into the sand, and they put the plug back in, put new oil in it, drive off. And so they did a lot of that type of thing. We also had, with cattle in Florida, they had arsenic in what they called cattle dipping vats. So the cows would walk through a water bath, if you will, that had arsenic in it. So those kind of things show up on the aerials, number one. And number two is that the environmental consultant who's doing your phase 1 would find those items and decide whether or not they needed to go to what they call phase 2. If they discover any chemicals and other things on there that would necessitate further investigation, then they would have what's known as a phase 2. Robin has had experience with that too. There was, for example, in downtown Orlando, the Orlando Sentinel was dumping chemicals in the ground for 40 years or whatever. So the extent of that, the material kind of fans out, and then so it creates a fairly large area. There was the same thing happened with a dry cleaner in the city of Sanford, Florida. So they dumped a lot of chemicals, just dumped them in the ground. Also, a lot of the gas stations that were out there had tanks that leaked, and that stuff went into soil. Once you get into what they call a phase 2, it can get extremely and extraordinarily expensive. So you need to be careful when you're doing your development that you have a phase 1 done. If you're going to do any type of bank financing, you're going to have a phase 1, and then that'll determine whether or not you need a phase 2. If you're getting into phase 2 things, once you've bought the property, you now are the owner of that event. So if there are hazardous waste chemicals on there, you're now responsible for that. The previous owner generally does not have any recourse unless it's something like the Orlando Sentinel, where everybody knew that they've been dumping for 40 years. The next line is purely the environmental. If you have any wetlands on site, we have critters here. We have gopher tortoises in certain areas, certain elevations. They have a thing called the sand skink. Polk County down by Disney, they have the sand skink, which happens at elevations over 83 feet above sea level and on sandy type soil. And when you get into those kind of things, those are area specific. The sand skink studies have to be done roughly between March 15th and May 15th. So if you're going to buy a property in June, let's say, you can't do the sand skink study until March of the following year. So, and if you're in that sand skink area, you have to be careful there. Eagles are well known, and they have pretty well charted most of the eagles around, at least in Florida they have. And then we have different birds, and there's different critters that, so we call it the bird du jour, the animal du jour of what we need to, and that's all usually site specific. So if you're in Polk County, you know you've got skinks. If it's a former orange grove, you know you've most likely had an area where they dump some oil, and then you may have the vats with the arsenic, etc. And then, so the next thing is traffic. Depending on the size of your project, in this particular one with 22 units, we weren't required to have a traffic study. At 50 or 60 units, we may have to have a traffic study. I'm just finishing a traffic study on another project that we're doing on something else that was around $7,500. The geotech is also known as soil testing. So you're going to have soil tests done for several things. Your engineer is going to need those. Most areas are going to have retention, necessity for retention. So there's a thing called the drawdown. So when you dig the hole fills up when the storm event happens to a certain level, and then it has to drain down within a certain period of time. So that's done. And then all your roadway areas, typically every 500 feet, they need a boring on roadway. So you can see we're budgeting $7,500 for this project for geotech. It's a little up 2.5 acres. So we've got some initial work done right up front. Then we've got some more later as the engineer's getting going. The engineer and the geotech consultant, typically the civil engineer and the geotech consultant will work together. And so the civil will send the geotech a plan, and they'll usually X out where they want the borings done and the necessary depth of the borings. If you're in an area that's known to be sinkhole, you may have to do some really deep borings, which go as far as 100 feet. So you need to be careful there. Also, the geotech will let you know what types of soils that you have. My civil engineer just left my office a few minutes ago, and I was showing him the report on one of our projects. And they had drilled holes 25 feet deep and did not encounter water. And so for us in Florida, that's like an incredible thing, because I worked on a big project in Southeast Orlando where we used to laugh and say if we scuff the ground, we get little geysers that came up. So because of the high water table. In here, we include a category for development management. We're charging something for our firm to manage this process. It's not a lot, but all finance people will accept that. Initially, we have a small amount of application fees, and then we have more application fees, typically to the county or the city, whatever your jurisdiction is, and then water management district. And back here we have the plat. And then we threw in a contingency factor. So here's our monthly costs. So we can budget this through monthly, and then the totals here is 86,500 is what we anticipated to spend on 22 units, which is 3,900 a unit. So you can roughly say, in our case, we generally figure about 4,000 a unit. There's economies of scale as we get larger projects. Some of the costs the civil engineer will go up, the geotech will go up, the landscape architect not a whole lot, in this level 1 environmental not very much. In this particular case, this was a high and dry piece of property we're looking at with roads on 3 sides and a house on the 4th side. So the environmental was a nominal charge. That number can go way up depending on whether or not they have to flag wetlands, etc. Anyway, does anybody have any questions on this?
Hey,
Okay, seeing no-
okay. Yeah,
Go
no, I was just going to comment that on the level 1 that went to the level 2 on the Sanford property, that property was a $2 million basic repair, and the plume had gone quite a ways. So if you get into a situation where you discover that with a phase 2 that there is issues, it may kill your deal if you haven't already closed on the property. So that's something you might want to find out before you close, is whether there's an environmental issue there.
That would be, in my case, it would be an imperative thing to figure out. We would never close without that. Okay, so down here, the note says that this line 15 total here goes back up to line 16 on the summary. So one of the things that I do in all my pro formas is I number the lines. So let's say Robin was looking to invest in this or be involved in it somehow or whatever. I could say, look at the permit sheet. You can go down here and look at permit, and then look at line 9. And here's what we had for environmental, or here's what we had for the civil engineering, and here's how we think those dollars are going to flow. So then we go from there to the construction cost. And what's really interesting, I'm going to go actually clip over to impact and utility. This is just a straight chart. This is Volusia County. We're in the county, so we have impact fees. We have one for thoroughfare and roads, fire, cultural, local cultural district, schools. And then down here we have water connection fees, sewer connection fees. So I threw in a contingency factor, and so we have $14,000 worth of impact fees and connection fees before we even do anything. There's a few municipalities in Florida now that are going to collecting some of these impact fees. Instead of collecting them at the point when you pull your building permit, they're just now, Osceola County just passed where for affordable housing projects, you could pay when you close out the project, when you get your CO. So from an interest standpoint, if I got 14,000 that I can spend 3 months later or 4 months later, there's a carry cost factor on that. So it would be nice if you didn't have to pay that. This is a fairly low number for a lot of areas. Some of the main areas, like Orange County, is talking about doing a 12,000, going up to 12,000 and change just for school, and they're up around 8,000 for transportation. So it's not unusual to get into the 20s, 20,000 now plus, depending on where you are in Florida for that.
You break that up and put it into per lot, that 14,000. Do you divide that by 22?
No, that's each lot.
Oh, that's per lot. Okay.
Per
So
lot.
multiply that 14,000 times 22.
Yeah. 292,000, I think. So I come over to the summary and you'll see that that number plugs back in over here at impact utility fees and connection fees at 308, which is 14,000 a unit based on the 22 lots. Here, those rezoning numbers are replicated up here. So what happens is when I look at this cell, it goes to the permit. Can you all see that? Goes
Yeah.
to permit line 27, which is wherever 27 is down in here. And it, oh yeah, right here, that number pops back up and populates into here. So before we would do the, it's nice, it's automatic that it just automatically populates. In here, the impact fees are calculated as we pull the building permits. So as we pull permits up here, we're pulling 8 permits, so it's 8 times the, excuse me, 14,000 comes in here. And that's, so one thing I want to show you real quickly is, well, one of the things that's neat about tiny houses as compared to normal subdivision, especially doing a small deal like this, is the building cycle is so fast. And I'll get there in a minute with the construction. But what happens is you're going 6 or 8 months with your pre-development, and then you close on the land. Once you close on the land, hopefully you can start your infrastructure right away, which is up here. And I'll get back to that in a few minutes. But that infrastructure starts, it's only going to take a couple of months to do a 2.5 acre or even 3 or 4 acre project. So what happens is you get this, you spend $100,000 for the first 8, 10, 12 months. And then over the course of just a few months, you spend a ton of money, and then you start selling, and the sales proceeds then generate back into you. So you may have an overall cost of, let's say, $5 million on your project, but you may only spend $3 million of it. And I'll come back to that in a few minutes.
In other words, you're only
So
going to
go-
be out of pocket for that 3 million, or at any point in time, you only have $1.6 million, I think was your highest number there, was 1.6 million was the highest outlay that you had to do in order to do a $5 million project.
Yeah, it's a little bit more than that, but I'll show you when we get there. So here's our building cycle. We figure we start 8 1 month, 7 1 month, and 7 another month. We're allowed to go vertical in most places in Florida once we have a stabilized road base and water available to the site, so that a fire department could pull up on a stabilized road with their fire truck, hook up to a fire hydrant, and put out the fire. If that makes any sense. So here, and then we're able to close 2 months or 2.5 months or whatever in the 3rd month after we start the house. So it's an incredible, to me, it's an incredibly quick cycle. And doing 22 units, this whole cycle is 5 months. As compared if I was doing a 200 unit subdivision and I'm selling 4 or 5 a month, you know, you're going out where all your profit is 2 years out. Typically what happens with the developers is you make about a 20% profit, and that's the last 20% of your deal, because you're paying everybody back on a increased schedule, so that they're out while you still have 20% of your units. If that makes any sense. So that 20% is your profit. Here I have this set up.
With that, Scott, being the case, obviously a 22 unit project is a lower number than if you did a 60 unit project. If you're, you know, and it's not any more work, it's a little more economy of scale. So I understand why you're going more in the direction of a 60 unit development rather than a 22 unit development.
What's nice about the 22 unit for us is that this will be a demonstration project for Volusia County. They're going to put a lot of things in here that they haven't seen in a development before. We're doing low impact development. We're doing green stormwater management. We're using xeriscaping, which is natural landscaping, permaculture, which is basically natural landscaping. So we're doing a lot of things that everybody would like to see that nobody's typically used to seeing. And so we're trying to add all this in with tiny homes and attainable affordability and the sustainability of it, because when you sell your house, you have to sell it to somebody who's in that same income bracket. So we're hitting almost, you could sit down with your planning department and say, give me your list of criteria of stuff that you would love to see in a development, and we're hitting just about every box.
Okay.
So,
So basically what I see here is your construction costs to build this 396 square foot home is going to be 70,488.
yep, yes, sir.
Okay.
We're basing that on $178 a square foot
Mm-hmm.
for that. And then we have it set up in draws. So down here, we're saying 60% of the amount that we need for construction is in draw number 1, 40% in draw number 2. And what happens is, to get to this cell, it goes up here and picks this number, comes down and picks this number, and pumps it in here. So I can change this and make this 200, and you see everything changed.
Right. And 178 in your area is a pretty good number for square foot for construction of the type of construction that you're going to build for your tiny house.
That's about where we're at right now.
Okay.
And that, again, is just the physical construction part.
Right. That's just the
So-
vertical.
Right. So that's how it flows. So you start at 8 here. You got 60% this month and 40% this month. In this month, you start 7. So you've got 60% times 7 is here. And then you got 40%, 60%, 40%. And then I bring it down this way so that it comes down here and you can total the month. So if we had more houses and we were working on the same type of schedule, we just extend this out a little bit. But this gives me my monthly construction costs. So you can see I go from 330 to 520 to 493 to 197, and I'm out at my $1.5 million.
Have you sold any homes yet by the time you get to that 5th month?
We are working right now in our planning meeting, actually 2 planning meetings that we had over the Christmas break. We will anticipate that when we start this first house, we'll be at least 50% pre-sold.
Pre-sold meaning they put a deposit down, but I'm talking about when do you close and you start replenishing the money and paying down the loans that you've got out, because that's an important factor there. If you're paying interest on $1.5 million, that's quite a bit of interest.
Yeah, I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, so that's how the construction works. The construction management, we're putting in a $5,000 per home fee on top of the $70,000. So our real cost is going to be really $75,000, but we broke it out so we're taking a construction management fee to oversee the construction of that. We're using a general contractor. The plan is to use a general contractor to build the homes. Turnkey. So we're creating some extra dollars for ourselves here. Same type of deal. You get 3,000 of it and then 2,000, 3,000 and 2,000, and it goes up here times the number of houses, and that pumps in here and it kind of works through. Both of these numbers transfer back to the summary. One is here as the home construction costs, and the other is construction management fixed fee. Everybody see that?
The construction management fee is in addition to your 20% profit.
No, I'll show you that in a few minutes.
Okay.
Because we're doing profit a little differently. We're
Okay.
looking at an overall job profit. So up here at the top, I go back through my general categories. So here I have rezoning, pre-development, permitting, land acquisition, infrastructure, home construction starts, and home closings. Those are my major, what we consider to be our milestone events. So through that, and here I use my little X's again, so I can see when things are happening. So you can see we closed the land, and coming over here, second, do this. Coming over here, you can see we're giving ourselves 3 months for the infrastructure, which would be January, February, March of 24, a year from now. And then home construction start about 5 or 6 weeks in, because at that point we'll have stabilized road and water to the site. And we'll start the houses, and then a couple months later we start to close them. Everybody see how that flow type works? We're spending 8 months doing the permitting and all of that, and this whole building 22 and closing them is in 6 months.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. Then when we're doing pro formas, any of the banker type people that you want to sit down with are all going to be looking for what they call sources of funds and uses of funds. So in this case, I have a capital investment, which we'll show you at the bottom. Here's our home closings, and you can see that over here, I got 8 closings up here at 170,000 times 8 yields us a gross number of 1,360,000. We're taking off at the top because in essence, I'm taking a 6.5% closing factor on that. So while I receive 1,860,000, I don't really get all of that, because I have to pay the broker that brought the buyer in. I need to pay my doc stamps, title insurance, and then we're going to market. We'll be our own broker. So we'll have marketing costs and our own brokerage fee. So we're looking at 2.5% to the outside broker who brings us the buyer, 2.5% to us, and then about 1.5 extra in regular closing costs. Here we have documentary stamp tax on the deed, which is 70 cents per 100, which is 0.7. The title insurance is about a little over half a point. So between those two, we usually have about 1.25% accounted for, and then we give another 0.25% for miscellaneous closing costs, title searches, and FedEx fees, and all those kind of BS costs that the title companies lump on us. Here I have a place for a contribution for buyers' closing costs. In this particular deal, we don't feel that we're going to need to put any money toward the buyer's closing costs. We think we're going to be okay. In here, I can also put a bank loan as a source of capital. So in this particular case, we're using this pro forma is based on the fact that Mr. Butler is going to write us a check for the $3 million that we need to get this project going, and that he's going to take a percentage of profit, and then we're going to move forward. So typically we would do the first go round of the pro forma, figuring that we're raising cash to build it. So that's the top part. That's what they call sources of funds. Then we have uses of funds. So that's the other category. And if you don't really set them up with sources and uses, your banker or your financial people, they don't really think you sort of know what you're doing. I've done some pro formas where I got an incredibly large term sheet from a family office, and the guy who reviewed my pro forma, this was on a mixed-use project, and I built everything on paper, and I leased it all up and sold it all out, did everything. It was an immense, he said he'd never seen anything like it. It was the best pro forma that he had ever seen. So I generally will follow this format. Once in a while, we'll stick in an extra line or two, but when we go through the categories, I think you'll see that we really don't need to add a whole lot of anything. So the rezoning and the pre-development and the permitting, that's the high risk money. We had that back here, if you remember. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we had that in there, but that's your high risk money, because that you're investing on somebody's property. You're getting a survey done. You're doing some preliminary geotech. You're doing maybe a tree survey. You're doing some environmental work. You may do the phase 1 environmental up front. you're spending, and we talked about this a few weeks ago, that you're spending anywhere from 15 to say 30,000 immediately up front on some of those costs, and then up to, in our case, 86,000. And I'm working on another project where I'm consulting for another nonprofit that does a lot of work with the homeless. They're doing a project that we have 150,000 budgeted for the pre-development, the rezoning, pre-development, et cetera, because it's a much bigger project.
And the reason why that's a high risk number right there is that the at some, you haven't closed yet. You could, this is a no, or you get to a point where you say this is a go or a no-go project. And if you say it's a no-go, then all of those are sunk costs that you're not going to get back. It's just, you know, you just walk away from it at that point. Is that why you're saying that's a high risk?
Yeah, you could sit around the campfire and just burn 20 or 30 grand, you know, by sticking it and doing your s'mores on it, because those are dollars that you're going to spend. That's why we typically don't work on a whole lot of stuff that we don't think we can get done, because we know we're going to spend usually minimum 5-10 grand, most of the time 15 to 30 is kind of a good estimate or rule of thumb if you're getting into the very first phase of a project where you've found some dirt and you want to go do it.
All right, well, that's a lot less than 86.5, 15 or 20,000. So what's the difference?
Well, the difference is once we get towards rezoning, then we know we have the project in this particular case. So once we know we have the project, then we're going to spend the money to get the civil engineering going. He's going to need extra geotech. We'll need the landscape. We'll need some of these other factors that we don't have to do until we know that we have a project.
Okay, but you said the 86.5 was a high risk number, but it's not really. The 15 or 20 was your high risk number.
Yeah, the 15 to 30 is really high risk, but still, when your investors are looking at it, you don't really have anything, you haven't closed on the land, et cetera. They consider that to be the high risk money. Anybody you talk to anywhere, when you tell them, we're looking at this site, we're getting it rezoned, and we're planning on closing as soon as we have the permits, they all will automatically, the red flags go up. That's your high risk dollars.
Gotcha.
Once you close on the land, now you have something. So a lot of the people that we talked to in terms of our preliminary financing all said the same thing. Every one of them said, once you have your zoning and you own the land, we'll be happy to talk to you about financing the project.
Do they want you to have permits also?
Yes.
Okay, so they want you to have the zoning, the permitting, and the land.
Yeah, so
done.
They'll come in and close the land at the very end, but what we've done now is we've sat down and we're just about done with our private placement offering, and so we've done all that legal paperwork. We hired a group out of St. Augustine called Syndication Attorneys that do this daily, and they set us all up. So we're doing two funds. We're doing two $700,000 funds, FUNDS, and then we're going to do a $3 million to actually go to vertical. And what we're doing, the first $700,000 fund, we'll do 3 of these projects and then give us a profit. And then we will sell that permitted dirt into the vertical next deal, if you will. So
the investors are going to get a good return on their investment because you're going to sell that back to the development company.
That's actually going to do the vertical. And the reason we're doing 2 700s is the second 700 will let us do projects 4 to 10, we think, because we'll have enough money back that we can support some of that ourselves. So we've raised a little over 200,000 now. That's why we're ready to go rock and roll on 2 of these, because we're looking at, call it 86.5, call it 100 on each project. So we've got over 200 raised, so we can get 2 going. That makes sense.
Right.
Okay, the architecture, we've tossed in 9,000 for this particular project. When you go and have your plan sets done, we want to have different elevations. One of the things that Volusia County Planning and Zoning staff told us is they don't want them all look exactly the same. So we've got different roof lines and different exterior materials. We'll have some siding, some fake brick, some fake stone, maybe a struck block, which is what they call split face or struck block, which is a concrete block that has a decorative design on the outside, and then a stucco finish. So we'll have different finishes, we'll have different roof lines, etc. Typically what happens with an architect is they'll charge you a certain amount to do the plans, and then later on when you replicate the plan on project 2, 3, 4 or whatever, they have what they call a reuse fee, which is maybe 100, 200, whatever, 300 per project, per plan, per home. So if I do, let's say 50 units and it's 200, I'll pay him another 10,000 later on down the road as we do project 2. And here we have land acquisition. In this particular case, our land was 350. We added 5,000 in for closing costs. And we had our impact fees. We talked about those already. The infrastructure we're figuring is about 15,000 a unit, and over a 3-month construction period. That again comes out in January, February, and March. And then I had home construction costs. I had laundry and vending, construction management, fixed fee. Oh, this laundry and vending and meeting construction is for our little mini clubhouse and some of our amenities. I should add amenities in there. But we figure we can do all of that for about $100 grand. Construction management was a fixed fee of 5,000, as we talked about. We're tossing in a marketing budget of 10,500, which would include some print material, but not a lot, mostly internet presence. Interim property taxes and insurance. In Florida, the property taxes are assessed as of January 1st of a given year. So if I have vacant land and a non-CO, I could be a week away from finishing a house. If it has not been issued a certificate of occupancy as of January 1st of the year, it's not treated as a completed project. So what you'll see is while people are developing homes on land, a lot of times it will not show up on the property tax roll as a completed project because the CO was not issued. And they may have pulled a building permit in September and they may be just about done, but if it's not done, it's still going to show up for the next year as vacant land in Florida. Then we have insurance. We would just typically have a general liability. The builder will have his own insurance, including workman's comp. Here's a development management fee. Again, we have a fee to oversee the entire development now. So we had a specific one for construction. We had a specific one for the pre-development part, and now we have one for overseeing the whole project. We popped in $7,500 for legal, accounting, marketing, and professional. That did not include our one-time upfront charge. We spent about $25,000 on the syndication attorneys. But we can reuse that over and over again. And we'll have another when they do the second fund, but it'll probably be about $10,000 when they go to the $3 million building fund, which we haven't quite gotten to. Here we'd have a return of capital. I'll show you that later. Here, if you're going to put a bank financing on your project, you need to figure about 3% for closing costs and an appraisal. If you're doing any type of commercial project, you're most likely going to have an MAI appraisal, which is a member of the Appraisal Institute. So the guy who does your typical houses, if you know, let's say you buy a house and you have your appraisal done, it's $330 or $450, whatever the number is for your house. It's a totally different deal when you're doing a development. So you're going to need an MAI appraisal. The appraisal is probably going to be start at $4 grand, $4,500 for my 22 lot deal. And going up to 60 lots, probably be in the neighborhood of 7,000, 8,000, something like that. And you're going to have your bank loan interest. Here I put in a 5.5% factor, figuring that we'd get a little bit of a break because of the affordability nature. Somebody, one of the banks, if they financed us, would be able to take what they call CRE credits, community redevelopment credits. Right now, I've been hearing that on a typical commercial loan, you could be going anywhere from 6 to 9% right now. So my 5.5 might be a little bit low. Then you would have a line here to return your bank loan. We have deficit funding for the HOA. We'll have a homeowners association, and at the beginning, you'll be paying to cut the grass and doing things where you haven't necessarily had enough home closings to provide enough capital to run that association. So we have in here deficit funding for the association, and then we tossed in a contingency. So our whole use of funds is little over 3 million, and it's 136,822 a unit. So our dead cost to provide this product on a foundation that's energy efficient with all this other stuff that we talked about, a $100,000 amenity package is 136. I really need to add this package here, probably needs to be more like 150. So I could do this by just punching in 150. And then you can see everything changed. So it took me up to 139 a unit.
Okay, so in other words, 139, you're selling for 170, so that's going to be a $30,000 profit per unit.
Yeah, and you can see our margin here is 14.27% at that point. We've told the county that we will work open book with them on a 17.5% margin. So if I was going to do that, I'd probably come up here and do this, which is come down to my sales price and maybe pump it to 175. So the nice thing about that is when you change that, everything else changes. Now we come down here, we got a 17.6% margin. We've got more money coming in, 163 versus 139 in cost. We got 24,000 in profit per unit, or a 17.6% margin. Everybody that we've talked to will accept the 17.6% margin for a government type affordable housing project. We've had not one piece of pushback on that. So coming over here.
And also that's predicated upon whether you can sell them for 175,000 too, what the market will bear.
Yeah, we're totally confident of that. The average price new home in Volusia County is 377,000 and change.
Right.
And in Greater Orlando, the new price housing is all over 400. So we're talking about being less than 50% of the average new house in the areas that we're talking about building in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that, don't forget, that adds in, extremely low. You go back to our amenity sheet, if you will, that we're having extremely low energy bills. We have a 10-foot wide front porch on all these houses that face into this courtyard area that has the barbecue grills, fire pits, picnic tables, a pavilion. There's a community garden area. There's no internal streets, so we're providing the social connectivity. We're going to fence it in so that the outside people can't get into us, et cetera. So when you start to look at all those factors, being 50% or less than the average selling price in the area is actually fairly attractive. So what happens when we do this and look at this, what Robin was talking to earlier, is this all will now let you calculate out to your monthly cash flow and your cumulative cash flow. And you keep going across your cumulative cash flow. And in this particular case, we're $1,736,000 theoretically as the most that we'd ever be out. Because what starts to happen when we look at our cash flow, we go from negative, all of a sudden, when we get these home sales, what happens?
Right. You go positive again. Yeah.
And then we go positive, positive, positive. And then the last month is negative because we're doing what we call project closeout. So down here, in terms of the investment required, we said we need 100 grand up front because we want that whole 86.5 in the bank, if you will. And then, as you can see up here, we're spending it. And then on each of these months, we have a certain amount that we've accumulated the spending. And at this point, we get into here, we're actually a little bit over. But then we popped in $1.5 million, and that gave us the ability to have positive cash flow through here. And then at this point, once we have all this extra cash, we could start to return that capital to whoever the investor was, or the bank, or whoever it went to. We put it down here to keep it out of being up in here anywhere, because then it skews the numbers terribly. And then, so at this point, the investor's gotten all their money back, and we're left with a $539,000 profit to divide with the investors.
Okay. That makes sense.
So if we said, let's say we split that 50-50, call it 540, then you're looking at 270 in profit over, having basically, the investors aren't going to come in until we close the land, which is right here, right in here, someplace in here. That's when they're going to come in. Now, so you're looking at a 6-7 month period where the most that you're going to invest is $1.7 million, and you're getting 270 back at the end of 6 months.
Yeah, I don't know what that ROI is, but that's pretty good.
That's pretty good. So our belief is that once we're showing people that we can do one, once we get the second one done, it'll actually end up being cheaper for us to do the third project, because we'll be going to the bank financing where we're paying, on a 50 or 60% loan to cost, we're paying 5.5%, 6.5%, 7% rather than the 20, 30% or whatever it's going to be for the investor that writes the check now.
Yeah, I just quick calculated it. Works out to about 16% in 6 months, which is about 32% return on your annualized on your money. All right. Well, look, Scott, how are we doing time-wise? We're out of time. We got 5 minutes. Can we look at the lease one real quick?
Sure.
It's just, so the difference between the sale and the lease is going to be the costs are all going to be the same. It's just what money, basically, you don't get it all out in 6 months. You basically get it out over time, but then you still end up owning the units after they're paid off. So
so what starts to happen is you start to rent the units. So then you have to figure out what your rent is, and then you come in here, and then you end up with a gross rent. So in this case, let's see what I got here. In this case, we were selling the units and just renting the lot.
Okay.
So in this case, I think we were charging $500 a month in lot rent. So as we kind of came through this, then we started having, the way we actually do this is that over the first year, it's a little bit different under the summary here. Let's see if I can show you. I didn't do that, sorry. Yeah, and here the rent, you want to prorate your project till you have an annual that you can do an annual rent with, if that makes any sense. So let's say I'm starting selling my units starting renting my units in November. I'm going to go November, December, and then January I'm going to have a full accoutrement of units to rent. So I'm getting my full gross income. Any other income you would put in here. And then down here, I didn't really kind of go through this, but the categories that you would have would be property taxes, insurance, utilities. In many areas, they're paying, sometimes they're paying for the water or whatever. You could also master meter the water. So let's say I get a bill for the water for $2,000, then I can bill out everybody at $42 a month or whatever. And then marketing, management, legal, accounting, and miscellaneous. So what happens is when that total comes in, then you've got your net operating income that comes off your income less your expenses. I mean, you'd have to put these numbers in, but they're so different for every individual project. And then like here, we pay our taxes. I've got taxes over here in November, insurance in November, because that's when I started. So in this particular case, I had $15,000 worth of annual expenses. I had $117,000 worth of net income. And then you can do, this is a 10-year cash flow analysis. Year 2, this is a 3% annual increase. And then what happens, you can see this goes up to 150,000. And after 10 years, if you capped it at, it should be 10%. 10%, you got $1.5 million in value. So it's kind of interesting. If you capped it, your income at the end of the 5th year at 10%, you'd have $1.3 million in value. And don't forget, you've already sold all the units. So at that point, theoretically, you may not have anything into the project at all.
Right.
Which is the beauty of the long-term ownership, if you could own it that long.
And in 10 years, you basically have all your debt paid and you own everything free and clear. Then
theoretically, you wouldn't have any debt because the house sale prices should clear you out of your project.
Oh, should be.
Now you,
so you basically have the investors, they're going to want to return. Obviously, they get their principal back, but will they stay in with the rental portion in order to get their profit for their investment?
Well, it's now a different deal. Because what you're trying to do is within that first year. So let's say that's 2023 or 24, because I've done all my permitting and everything like that. I'm selling my units. What I'm trying to do is make enough money that once I hit 24, 25 in my full annual rental, because I've got a portion every year, I'm trying to break even and pay myself back out of that. If I can do that, I now have a full this every month coming in, whatever that number becomes, that much for year 25. So I have no money in it. And at that point, I've got 117,000 worth of income. So I might be able to make as much as $1 million on that if I just sell it as soon as I stabilize.
Or just keep it for retirement income. 117,000 you could live off of pretty easily.
Yeah, well then the 117, if you go to the next year, this keeps going up every year. At that point, you have nothing in it, or very little in it. So what our idea was on this pro forma, I was able to during that first year, which 23 was my permitting and get them started. 24 was build them, same building cycle, January through June. And hopefully by the end of the year, I've received enough money in lot rent and sales proceeds to have nothing in this project.
Got it. Makes sense. Wow, that's a lot of numbers, guys, and hopefully you were able to follow that. All of these will be available on our member portal for you to go back and review. And I don't know, I hate to ask, but is this a template that you could sell or give to us that we can utilize, or is that something that?
No, you have it, and I'm delighted that anybody that wants to use it can use it. Every project is going to change slightly, so your numbers are going to be different, your months are going to be different, etc. But the template should give you every line item that you need to fill in or not have, like in the case where we did not have the bank loan. But if you had a bank loan, you'd stick the bank loan in. So you got all your costs and everything there. Your interim taxes, your interim utilities, and some of those kind of things may change. Your permitting costs may change. But as you do the pro forma, we always do the permitting one first, the impact and utility together, And then we did the construction, where are we gonna be? And we put it back into the summary. Oh, and then I didn't show you the recap sheet. One quick second. This is what your investors really want to see. Give me 1 minute.
That's when you have investors. When you have a bank, you don't have investors, but the bank would want to see.
The bank will still want to see this, yeah. Here it comes. I want to come up. Hang on. Give me one more try. Anyway, the recap, all it does is it takes the items that we had on the left. Recap. All these items are the same that were on the left. And these are the numbers from the right side of the pro forma. It just took out the spread in the middle. So if I'm an investor and I want to see the rezoning and permitting, I can go down here and look at that page.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This,
So
if
that
I want to see the
86.5, that 86.5 is located on the permit page.
right. And if I want to see the construction, I can go there. If I want to see the summary, how it's all spread, I can see that. But if I just want to be big picture and say, okay, what are my numbers? You know, I'm here, I get 3.5 million and I spend 3 million. We're making 539, which is a 24% return on the
There you
project.
go. 24% of 24,000
24,000
unit. Per unit.
per unit.
Right. Right.
But you know,
Well-
if you're doing a project and you know you get a $539,000 profit in 18 months on $1.7 million investment, that's really not too bad of a deal.
No, absolutely not. And and the bigger projects just have bigger numbers. May take a little bit longer, but that's good. Thanks, Scott. I am just want to say that next Wednesday we will be probably going over the basics of horizontal and vertical construction, and then we have the exit strategy slides, and then we will be done. So just wanted to give you a heads up. I think we've got one more week before we're finished with these. Leanne, is that how that's going to play out? If not, we might have to fit another week in here somehow or another. But on the 18th, I think we're going to be someplace else, so we need to be done by then.
Even if we have to stay late for class.
Yes.
All right.
So-
Well, anybody have any questions for us this evening? I don't see any. Nancy says, thank you, Scott. And I say thank you, Scott, for spending time with us and giving us this priceless education.
Thanks for having me, and feel free to use those forms and you know, good luck with your projects.
All right, and we'll put those forms on the in the member portal then, so you can use them too along with the PowerPoints.
Well, thanks
All right,
everybody
guys.
for joining us. Tomorrow night we have our inspector discussion chat Q&A. We'll see what topics they have cooked up to talk about. So you guys
It's
have
always a
great
good time.
evening.
Yes,
Definitely.
it's always lively discussion with these inspectors. All right,
Everybody
guys.
have a good night and thank you so much.
Happy
Good
New
night,
Year.
all.
Thank you.
Happy New Year. Bye.